Welcome back to VERDO Studio, where we believe that the most beautiful gardens are built with heart, hand, and a touch of nature's poetry. Today, we invite you to explore 24 inspiring and easy-to-follow DIY ideas using two of nature's most grounding elements, stones and driftwood. From peaceful pathways and handcrafted benches to whimsical fairy corners and calming water features, each idea is a gentle invitation to slow down, reconnect, and shape your outdoor space with materials that carry stories of their own. Whether you're dreaming of a wild cottage border, a minimalist zen corner, or just a cozy nook with a handmade lantern, this video is filled with warm, real-life inspiration that anyone can bring to life. If you love ideas that feel real, peaceful, and crafted with soul, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. VERDO Studio is here to help you rediscover the charm in every corner of your garden. One, natural driftwood garden pathway ideas. When Maya first envisioned her garden, she didn't start with flowers or borders. She started with a path, not the kind you find in magazines, paved with perfect tiles or lined with symmetry. No, she wanted a path that whispered stories beneath your feet. So she wandered, first along the beach, gathering driftwood sculpted by time and salt, then into the hills, where smooth stones waited patiently in dry riverbeds. She didn't measure. She listened, letting the materials lead. She laid each piece by hand, barefoot in the soil, arranging wood and stone like poetry in the earth. The driftwood curved softly with the land's natural slope, and moss slowly claimed the spaces between. On dewy mornings, the path shimmered like a memory. Birds often landed near it, as if drawn by its quiet welcome. This wasn't just a walkway. It was an invitation to slow down, to feel, to return. And perhaps that's the best kind of DIY. Not the polished, perfect kind, but the kind that grows with you one honest step at a time. Two, rustic seating with driftwood and stone elements. No one in the neighborhood believed Lena could build a bench. She didn't own power tools. She didn't measure angles. What she had was time, patience, and a deep love for things that felt lived in. It began with a single piece of driftwood, gnarled and soft, bleached by years under the sun. She found it during a rainy walk near the lake, lying against a cluster of mossy stones, as if waiting to be noticed. She brought it home, wiped it dry, and rested it between two boulders she had dug from her own backyard. It wobbled. It didn't sit quite straight, but it held. Over the weeks, more pieces joined. A flat board for the seat, a curved branch for the backrest. She tied and wedged, not with perfection, but with intention. A bench took shape, not sleek, not precise, but welcoming. On warm afternoons, she'd sit there with her tea, watching bees dance through marigolds. Visitors never asked who built it. They just sat, sighed, and stayed longer than planned. In the end, that's what a bench should do, not impress, but embrace. And when built by hand, with wood shaped by water and stone pulled from the earth, it carries more than weight. It carries stories. Three, organic stone edging for a rustic garden look. There's a kind of quiet satisfaction in placing stones by hand. Every morning, Tomas would carry 2 or 3 rocks in the pile near the gate, each one different. Some smooth like river whispers, others rough like memories chipped at the edges. He didn't rush. He simply followed the curve of the soil, laying them down like commas in a sentence the earth was trying to write. He wasn't trying to fence the flowers in. No, He was giving them a frame, a boundary that felt natural, like the line where forest meets field. There were no straight lines, no matching pieces, only rhythm, the gray of the stones against the green of the leaves, the crumbling edges softening under time and moss. Neighbors asked why he didn't just buy garden edging. Plastic would have been faster, neater, but neatness was never the goal. This was about harmony, about honoring the shapes nature had already made. And when the wind moved to the garden, brushing past petals and bouncing over stone, it all made sense. The imperfection wasn't a flaw. It was the point. For whimsical rustic fairy garden corners. In the corner of the garden where the shade lingered longest, Nora built a home. Not for herself, but for the stories she used to whisper as a child. She began with a piece of driftwood, crooked like a smile, and nestled it among the ferns. A flat pebble became a doorstep. A dried mushroom cap turned into a roof. There were no instructions, only memories of bedtime tales, of secret hideouts, of magic that didn't need to be proven. Her daughter, Lucy, joined in. They planted thyme and moss and tucked tiny pine cones beneath bark arches. With every new stone path or tiny wooden bench, the corner transformed, not into a fantasy, but into a feeling, a space where imagination could root and grow wild. Visitors often missed it. It wasn't loud or flashy, but those who slowed down, who crouched and looked close, always smiled, because something about it felt true. A fairy garden doesn't need wings or glitter. It needs care. It needs intention. And a little belief that even the smallest corner of a garden can hold an entire world. Five, charming driftwood garden arch design. Elias never saw himself as a builder, but he did see beauty in bones, the twisted, sun-bleached branches scattered along the shoreline near his cottage. Each one curved like an old man's laugh, softened by waves and years. He never meant to build an arch. He was gathering wood for kindling when he noticed two branches that leaned into each other like dance partners long after music ended. He carried them home, then found two more. Before long, a quiet idea took root. In the corner of his garden, he drove the first pair deep into the soil. He tied others across the top with jute rope. No nails, no symmetry. Just balance, just trust. His vines, the ones he thought were hopeless, began to cling, as if relieved to have something to hold on to. By midsummer, the arch was wrapped in green and bloom. It didn't scream for attention. It simply waited, a threshold between what is and what might be. And when friends walked beneath it, they slowed their pace. They looked up. They smiled. Elias never called it a project. He called it a welcome. Six, artisanal driftwood and rock garden planters. Somewhere between the creek and the tool shed, Margot found a piece of driftwood so hollowed by time it looked like it had always been a cradle for something green. She brushed off the soil, turned it in her hands, and imagined roots curling inside, finding rest in the curves left behind by rain and age. It wasn't a planter yet, but it had the heart of one. She pressed soil into its belly, soft and dark, then tucked in thyme, a splash of trailing sedum, and two bright marigolds for cheer. Around it, she built a nest of river stones, not to contain, but to elevate. The planter didn't sit. It belonged. Each one she made after that was different. Some leaned sideways, some split gently, some grew nothing but moss. But each held a story, of where the wood came from, what it once was, and what it had become now. A vessel for life. There's something comforting in growing things inside what once drifted lost. A reminder that nothing is ever truly forgotten. It just waits for the right hands to shape it anew. Seven, handcrafted rustic driftwood sculptures for outdoor art. There was no plan when June began. Only a growing pile of driftwood in the corner of the yard, collected from years of walks. Pieces too beautiful to burn, too curious to ignore. Each one had a shape. Some coiled like sleeping animals. Some reached like arms toward a forgotten sky. He began connecting them, not with glue or screws, but with balance. A branch leaned into a fork. A knot cradled a stone. Gravity was his only architect. One sculpture stood tall, like a watchman by the herb garden. Another curled into itself beneath the fig tree. They weren't labeled. They weren't explained. But they changed the garden, gave it a kind of presence, like silent storytellers weathered by sea and time. Visitors would stop mid-step, drawn by something they couldn't name. Children whispered near them, convinced they moved when no one looked. Art, June believed, didn't have to be grand to be meaningful. Sometimes it just had to feel found. And in those weathered lines and the imperfections that would worn soft by water, there was more expression than any brushstroke could paint. Eight, calming Zen garden accents with driftwood and pebbles. It started as a way to quiet the noise. After a long winter, Sammy wanted not more color, but less, not complexity, but clarity. He cleared a space and shade of his tallest tree, flattened the soil, and poured a bed of pale gravel. It caught the morning light just enough to glow, soft and unassuming. He placed a single piece of driftwood in the center, shaped like a slow-moving wave. Around it, he arranged river stones in wide arcs, each curve echoing the shape of silence. Every morning, before coffee or headlines, he'd rake the gravel with a handmade wooden comb, not to perfect it, but to breathe, to reset. He found peace in those lines, even when they blurred again with wind and squirrels and time. There was no fountain, no lanterns, just wood, stone, and space. But when friends visited, they lingered there the longest, speaking softly, as if the space itself asked them to. Sammy never called it a Zen garden. He just called it still. And sometimes stillness is the most powerful thing we can build. Nine, rustic outdoor lighting with driftwood and stones. When the days grew longer and the evenings lingered, Alma began lighting her garden not with bulbs or wires, but with memory and touch. She collected driftwood, branches curved by the sea's patience, and small stones smoothed by rivers long forgotten. She hollowed, carved, and tied them together, creating holders not meant to shine brightly, but to glow gently. Inside each, she placed a small candle or an old jar with a tea light. And when dusk came, she lighted them one by one, no rush, just a rhythm. The light flickered, casting quiet shadows on the leaves, dancing in the imperfections of bark and stone. It wasn't about brightness. It was about presence. A kind of warmth that felt lived in, not manufactured. Neighbors often asked where she bought them. She smiled, shook her head, and handed them a bundle of driftwood. "Start with what you find," she'd say, "and let the evening do the rest." Because sometimes the softest lights lead to the deepest peace, and the most memorable nights begin with a flicker carved by hand. 10. Nature-inspired birdhouses with stone and driftwood. May never thought the birds would come. Her little garden was quiet, tucked between rows of cement houses and humming wires. But one autumn morning, she noticed a feather caught in the rosemary, a whisper of a visitor. So she began to build. She found an old driftwood branch shaped like a rooftop, weathered and full of holes. A stone from her childhood path became the foundation. She tied the pieces together with string, not to keep them rigid, but just close enough to shelter. It wasn't perfect. The opening tilted slightly left. The roof didn't fully meet, but it was warm and it was real. The first guest came quietly, a sparrow with restless wings. Then another, and then another. May hung more birdhouses, each different, each made from pieces that once drifted or crumbled or waited too long in a forgotten corner. The garden began to hum. Wings flitted through morning mist. Songs started before sunrise. And May, once alone in her patch of green, found herself surrounded by life. All because she offered a home that didn't need to be flawless, just welcoming. "11. Earthy DIY rustic garden table ideas. Theo didn't plan to host garden dinners. He just wanted a place to write, to drink tea, maybe to sort seed packets in the sun. But when he found that slab of driftwood washed ashore, wide and worn like an old tabletop, he saw more than utility. He saw a gathering. 2 flat stones became his feet, not carved, just placed with care. The tabletop rested gently on top, unfastened but steady, as if the earth itself was holding in place. It wobbled when the wind was strong. It leaned ever so slightly to the east, but it stood. Soon came chairs, then candles, then neighbors with pie and conversation. The table wasn't polished. Its surface bore knots and soft scars. But those imperfections were what made it trustworthy, like a friend who's seen storms and still stands steady. By summer's end, Theo had shared that table with old friends and new ones, with raincoats and with string lights. He never called it furniture. He called it place. And in gardens like his, sometimes that's all you need. A place to pause, to share, to let the sun linger just a little longer. "12. Serene garden waterfalls using driftwood and rocks. Before the waterfall, the garden was lovely, but it didn't breathe. Lenny had always loved the rustle of leaves, the calls of birds, the hum of bees near the rosemary. But what she longed for was movement, a quiet rhythm that didn't ask for attention, only offered presence. So she built with her hands. No blueprints. No pumps at first, just a hollowed piece of driftwood with a curve like a cupped palm. Guiding rainwater into a basin she shaped with gathered stones. Slowly, she added a hidden system to keep the water dancing, even on dry days. Around the edges, she planted ferns and let moss find its way naturally. The sound was soft, a hush more than a splash. Visitors often didn't notice it right away. But once they did, they always stopped talking. It became the garden's heartbeat, a lullaby for afternoon naps, a quiet companion for early coffee. Lenny often said she didn't build the waterfall. She just revealed where it was meant to be. And when she sat nearby, eyes closed, she felt the whole world soften. Sometimes the most powerful changes in a garden come not from what you plant, but from what you let flow. "13. Rustic driftwood trellis for garden vines. Ellie never meant to train the vines. They had a will of their own, tangling to the lavender, curling around tomato cages, reaching skyward in joyful chaos. But one spring morning, she found a bundle of driftwood washed up after the thaw, and something about their crooked shapes whispered of possibility. She didn't sand them, didn't trim, just tied them where they leaned best, one tall, one short, one bowed like an old fiddle. Together, they stood like forgotten fence, handmade and quietly proud. The vines noticed first, like dancers sensing music in the stillness. They reached toward the new lines, twining with a grace Ellie never forced. Sweet peas, clematis, even wild beans, all climbed, stretched, bloomed. Each season, the trellis aged a little more. The wood grayed, the twine loosened, but the garden never cared. It only saw the shape, the offering. Sometimes, Ellie would sit beside it in the early evening, watching the shadows shift through leaves and stems. She built nothing perfect, but everything living, because a trellis doesn't need to be strong. It needs to be welcoming. And this one held far more than plants. It held quiet invitation. (14) DIY driftwood and stone lantern holders. Julian always believed the best light came not from switches, but from hands. Hands that tied, balanced, arranged. He remembered evenings from his childhood when his grandfather would light old oil lanterns on the porch, their glow trembling in the wind like fireflies learning to stay. That memory became the blueprint for his next project. He gathered driftwood, some still smelling faintly of salt, and selected stones that felt steady in the palm. With nothing but rope and time, he fashioned holders like small altars, one cradling a jar, another suspending a lantern above ground like a star caught in a branch. When lit, they didn't blaze. They glowed, quietly, kindly. Friends often asked why he didn't just buy garden lights. But Julian wanted more than illumination. He wanted presence, a flicker that said, "Someone cared enough to make this." And every time dusk slipped into the garden and those lanterns came alive, he smiled, not at the light, but at the shadows they cast. Gentle, imperfect, alive. Because in a world of brightness, sometimes it's the softest light that feels most like home. (15) Rustic stepping stone pathways with natural accents. When the rains came that spring, Lena noticed something beautiful, how puddles formed trails in her garden, as if the water remembered a forgotten path. She followed that memory with her hands. She started crafting stepping stones, but not the kind bought in bulk or cast from molds. Each one was made from scratch, using leftover concrete, river pebbles, and slices of driftwood that she gathered from long walks along the creek. No two were alike. Some were round, some square, some shaped like the thoughts she had while working. Into each wet surface, she pressed pieces of her day. A pine cone cap, a leaf skeleton, a rusty nail once part of fence. They dried under the sun, cracked a little in the corners, and when she laid them into the garden, they didn't line up, they wandered. But so did the eye, so did the feet, and soon so did the visitors. The path didn't lead anywhere important. It simply encouraged pause, a place to move slow, to feel something real beneath your steps. Because sometimes the way forward isn't paved, it's pieced together from the ordinary, made sacred by the walking. (16) Rustic candle holders with driftwood and stone bases. There was a time when Mara dreaded the dark. Long shadows at dusk made the house feel too quiet, too still. But everything changed at night. She lit her first driftwood candle. It wasn't planned, just a chunk which she found by the river, dry and soft, with a natural hollow at the center. She set a small tea light inside, and for stability, rested on a flat stone she'd used for years to hold open the garden gate. When she lit it, something shifted. The flame didn't blaze. It danced, slow, golden, thoughtful. She began making more. Some carved gently by hand, some left rough, their shapes determined by years of wind and water. The stones she chose not for color, but for feel, the ones that sat heavy in her palm, that felt like truth. On summer evenings, Mara scattered them around the patio. They didn't chase away darkness. They softened it. Neighbors would sometimes linger a little longer, tracing the light with their eyes. No one asked where she bought them. Everyone assumed they had always been there, because some lights don't declare themselves. They just arrive quietly and stay. "17. Artistic pebble mosaic wall decor with driftwood frames. When the fence began to gray and sag, most would have seen it as something broken. But Mira saw a canvas. She began with a frame, 4 pieces of driftwood, each twisted and worn by time. No two were alike. They didn't match. But they met. That was enough. Inside the frame, she began pressing pebbles into thin mortar. Not uniform stones, but those with quirks. Stripes, chips, subtle colors like quiet songs. She didn't follow a pattern. She followed feeling. A spiral here, a wave there, a sudden burst that looked like the wind had whispered it into shape. Day by day, the wall transformed. Not all at once, but like slow music. Visitors paused now, fingers tracing the lines, wondering who had made them and why. Mira never gave a name. She simply called it keeping company with the fence. Because sometimes beauty isn't about restoration. It's about recognition, honoring what's weathered with something tender, made by hand. "18. Eco-friendly wildlife corners with driftwood and rock layers. Levi wasn't planting for people. He was planting for guests he might never see. Bees, lizards, wrens, and beetles. They had been here long before him. So when he carved out a corner of the garden, he did so with humility, building not for beauty, but for belonging. He layered driftwood logs with space between, tucked stones beneath and beside them, creating crevices and cool shelters. Not tidy, not planned, but layered like time itself. Around it, he let native plants grow wild, their blossoms feeding more than just the eye. In the mornings, he'd spot a tailed dart beneath the wood. In the evenings, a chorus of unseen voices rose from the stones. Once, he found a feather left behind like a thank you note. There was no sign, no label, no guide, just a space made sacred by attention, by choosing to share the garden not only with friends and family, but with the quiet ones who make the world breathe. Because the truest gardens aren't just places to be seen. They're places to be part of something older, smaller, and infinitely important. "19. DIY garden privacy screens with driftwood and stones. It wasn't that Clara wanted to shut the world out. She just wanted her morning coffee to feel like a pause, not a performance. So she built a wall, not from fences or panels, but from driftwood gathered slowly, lovingly, over many weekends. Each piece carried its own history, one smoothed by river ice, another with bark clinging like memory. She tied them upright with thick twine, weaving their shapes into a form that let in light, but softened noise. At the base, she stacked stones like punctuation, grounding the screen, anchoring it to the place she called hers. Over time, ivy found the driftwood and made a home. Bees circled nearby lavender. The wall no longer stood out. It settled in. Neighbors asked who built it. She'd smile and say it just grew, because privacy, she'd learned, didn't have to be a barrier. It could be a frame, a gentle way of saying, "This is my quiet." And sometimes the most beautiful part of a garden isn't what's shown, it's what's held close. "20. Rustic swing bench from driftwood and stone pillars." When Ada finished building the swing, she didn't sit on it right away. She let it sway, empty, listening to the creak of rope, the hush of wind through vines. It felt like the garden exhaled. The idea had come to her on a tired morning, when the old bench finally gave in. Instead of tossing it, she kept the slats, tracing the marks left by weather and years of teacups. She found 2 thick driftwood beams at a nearby woodlet, heavy, curved, imperfect. Her son helped her raise them, setting them into stone bases they'd buried deep into the soil like roots. Then came the seat, simple, low, with ropes knotted by hand. It didn't glide smoothly. It moved like memory, slowly, gently, with pauses and pulls. When she finally sat, she didn't want to leave. Birds called nearby. The scent of basil floated in from the left. She wasn't swinging toward anything, only resting within. Now, guests gravitate to it. No one speaks loudly there. It holds laughter, stories, and silence alike. Because a swing like that doesn't just lift the body, it lifts the day. "21. Natural hanging planters with driftwood rods and stone weights." Callie never had room for more beds. Her garden was small, her walls already covered. But she looked up and found space waiting. From the attic, she pulled out an old driftwood rod, once part of a broken curtain rail. Its texture was uneven, its color faded, but its strength held. She tied ropes at both ends and hung it under the pergola. Beneath it, she fastened terracotta pots filled with thyme, strawberries, and tiny trailing ferns. To keep them steady in the wind, she nestled smooth river stones into the bottoms. Not just for weight, but for beauty, earth holding earth. Over time, the ropes frayed, the driftwood weathered further, but the planters swung like soft notes on a breeze, gentle reminders that sometimes the sky offers more ground than the soil ever could. "22. DIY rustic rain chains using driftwood and pebbles." Rain had always whispered to Jonas, but now it sang. He replaced the gutter downspout with something older, something made from driftwood and memory. He strung slices of branch and polished river pebbles along a weathered cord, letting them hang like a necklace offered to the sky. When the first storm came, he stood barefoot in the doorway. The water didn't rush. It danced. It trickled down the driftwood like old tears, tapped the stones, and landed in a handmade basin with gentle hush. He didn't need a garden fountain anymore. He had something better, a lullaby stitched from storm and stillness. "23. Driftwood and stone wind chime ideas." The sound was never sharp. It was more like breath. Suri built her wind chimes for what others left behind. Skinny branches, beach stones with holes worn by water. She hung them one by one, spacing them with care, letting gravity decide their rhythm. When the wind passed through, it didn't clang. It whispered, sometimes like a lullaby, sometimes like a conversation just beyond reach. Neighbors began to slow as they walked past. Children reached for the strings, but no one touched. It felt sacred, as if those sounds came not just from wood and stone, but from memory. '24. Rustic garden herb dryer made from driftwood frames. Not all harvests go into baskets. Some hang in the wind. Tara made her herb dryer from 4 driftwood branches and a handful of nails. Nothing more. She strung the frame between 2 trees, tied bundles of rosemary, thyme, lavender, each with string as old as her garden dreams. As they dried, their scent lingered, soft and patient. She didn't rush the process. Let the air do the work. Let time pull the oils into stillness. And when she finally unwrapped each bundle weeks later, they smelled like summer's memory, captured, crumbled, and stored for colder days. The dryer itself stayed, a simple frame, waiting for the next season, always ready, never needing praise. As the sun begins to soften and the garden settles into its evening hush, we hope these ideas have sparked something gentle in you, a desire to create, to reconnect, to craft beauty not from perfection, but from presence. Every stone, every piece of driftwood holds a quiet history, and when you place them in your garden with care, you're not just decorating, you're storytelling with nature. If one small idea from today's video finds its way into your hands, into your home, or into a quiet corner of your life, then we've done what we came here to do. From all of us at VERDO Studio, thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe for more slow, soulful DIY inspirations. And until next time, may your days be calm, your soil rich, and your creativity always close at hand.